Thank you for joining me for the longevity versus cryonics debate. So we have Karl here representing the longevity side and Emil for cryonics. Of course, they aren't necessarily speaking for the entire field, but I think this conversation can still be productive. And I have to give a special thanks because I've tried to organize debates a few times. I also tried at the Global Cryonics Summit. It's not easy. So a lot of people, they get very afraid around the word debate. So I have to give big props to the two of you for actually coming out and doing this. And I don't mean to pit longevity and cryonics against each other. So they have similar goals in living longer, but there are some differences. And I think a good faith debate can be a very good medium for understanding these topics better. So, without further ado, could the two of you start by giving me a brief backstory? So how did you end up focusing on longevity and cryonics, respectively?
So I got into this mostly from the point of view of just how to make the world better as much as possible. Very effective altruistic kind of arguments about what will save the most lives and reduce the most suffering per hour of my time or per dollar of money. It's that simple. I mean, both of the fields, I think, are trying to do that. So any differences is somewhere else.
So I didn't start out working on cryonics, right? I wanted to work on life extension. I wanted to work on longevity. So this is now. So my personal motivation, I was always just personally very afraid of dying and being dead forever and not seeing the future and all of the above. And I think everybody should have that right. So I studied medicine to do longevity things. Then went into cancer research and so on, and then switched over to cryonics at some point because the field, in my mind, doesn't progress fast enough. And I unfortunately think I need to be cryopreserved for a bit. As a stopgap measure until the rest of the field has figured it out, which fundamentally I think it will. So I think the only contention that I'm going to have is when will we figure it out?
Yeah, perfect. So cryonics and longevity are not an either or. You can definitely have one as plan A and the other as plan B. But I assume you two would have differing opinions on which one of those should be plan A. So could you each make your case for why your field should be plan A?
I kind of said it in the end, right? So my argument, of course, is so there's significantly more economic pressure in the world right now to make life longer, because just from a if you think cryonics and life extension has the same probability of succeeding in your lifetime, life extension longevity has the better value proposition. Right? Going into cryostasis for a while is not that great. It's better just to take the pill and then live happily ever after, right? So currently there's more economic pressure, I think, to make longevity work. So I think marginal. So my every dollar, and every additional hour that I can put somewhere, and if we want to make it into a broader argument, everyone who considers doing something in the field, either in this direction or the chronic, or in the longevity direction or the cryonics direction, there's probably more marginal impact on working on cryonics right now. And of course, if you look at the field, how much extra years of life we have gained, well, we haven't gained any. So I think it's if I'm wrong, then I just take the pill. I just do the treatment. If I'm right, then I'm dying at 85, and I want to make sure that there's good cryopreservation at that point.
So as Aubrey said in a question earlier today, just a minor point here about the phrasing of the question, right? It's not a plan A, plan B, as like you don't do the other one until the first one has failed kind of thing. I think we both agree that it's, fund both of them because one of them might not work in time. And the question, the fundamental difference of opinion here is which one is worth our time to personally work on, and if we controlled all the money in the world, what percentage would we give to, we'd give up a higher percentage to ours and call that plan A, and we'd still want to fund both of them, I think.
In ideal world, yes, right? But we live in the real world, right?
Yeah.
So unfortunately, usually the people who fund stuff like that, they it's not as. So I think that at least the people who advocate for cryonics, they need to some degree make the argument that we're not going to make it in time, right? Because if I would think that I make it in time, I wouldn't work on it. Why would I? Right? I would work on longevity.
But of course, there's always confidence intervals on even if you believe that it's likely to work on its own.
Absolutely. Or and then again, part of the funding, at least that funds the more adventurous longevity stuff and Cryonics, which is kind of also on the adventurous side, of course, it's similar, if not the same funders, right? So for them, unfortunately, you need to make the argument that one or the other, just because there's, unfortunately, we don't have all the money in the
Right,
world,
and you'd be 90-10 Cryonics, and I'd be 90-10 longevity or something like that. Is how we would push them to do their money.
Yeah, basically, right?
Yeah. And what kind of drives you towards that 90-10?
I fundamentally think that we are making good progress, and that there's a chance that we will not need cryonics for a large fraction of people who are alive today or soon to be alive, and I'm not convinced yet that we're there for cryonics, and I'm not sure how fast we'll come. So this is how fast we'll get to this. I think in more of the questions is sort of like what milestones have we reached, and how fast do we expect other milestones to come. Maybe we should go on with the questions, because I think more of the answers will
so
elucidate this.
It was kind of highlighted already, but longevity research is, while I'd say not funded enough, it's still much more well funded than cryonics research, something 4 to 5, even more orders of magnitude. So for each of you, why do you think this is? And do you think that there's a necessary shift?
Yeah, let me start with this one, because I want to zoom out and be even broader, right? Yeah, I think that's right. I think aging longevity is funded more than cryonics right now, but both of them are just a tiny fraction of what they should be relative to the broader biomedical field and science funding in biology, right? So, aging and longevity gets less than 1% of the NIH budget, despite the fact that it causes 90% of the deaths in the developed world, and it gets less than 5% of the venture funding in biotech, and less than 1/10 of what cancer gets, despite that aging is the primary driver of cancer risk. And on the philanthropic side, it also gets 1/10. So it's like, so maybe cryo is 1/5 of longevity, and longevity is 1/10 of cancer. So we're both sort of on the same page that this is the big problem that needs to be fixed. Then there's the question of why is there an imbalance between longevity and cryo, which is the crux of the question, and I think it's somewhat the same reason that there's an imbalance between cancer and longevity. People don't realize that it's actually possibly going to work. I think it's sort of cancer's got a demonstration of believability, and that longevity doesn't have, and that cryo maybe even doesn't have as much. This is my guess. I don't really know why the cryo isn't funded as much as longevity.
I think it's mostly value proposition. If I go to a potential funder who's not a scientist and not super deep in the field, right, and I tell them, listen, I'm going to solve I'm going to make some relevant impact on aging in 10 years, right? And then you can market this and so on. Whereas I go there and say, listen, so you're going to go into cryostasis when you die, right? And then at an undefined point in the future, we might or might not revive you, and we're definitely aware that we need future technology about it, right? I can't go there and say, hey, it's 10 years or 15 years, right? Everybody who does any amount of due diligence would say, nice, tough luck with that. So I think it's much easier to sell it to slightly less informed people.
Yeah, and I think a version of what you're saying is the time frames are different. It's this sort of feasibility, but also time frames, right?
It's an acquired taste. Cryonics is an acquired taste.
And people can believe the cancer thing's going to happen faster than they can believe rejuvenation's going to happen, and then maybe some people believe rejuvenation's going to happen faster than the revival piece of the cryo.
Okay. So let's get on to kind of timelines. By which year are you relatively confident that we'll reach longevity escape velocity? And in this case, I'll give a definition of longevity escape velocity as the moment that the life expectancy for the average 65-year-old will outpace their biological mortality with interventions.
So this is one of those questions where there's wide confidence intervals, and the confidence intervals, it's useful to bring up the disparity in funding that we just talked about. The world doesn't get it yet. The masses and the government officials that control the purse strings of the biggest sources of funding simply aren't fully on board with the field. And so how fast this comes depends very largely on when there's a big sea change in that. And, many of us believe that sea change is coming, and it's still highly uncertain and hard to predict when it is. So if that sea change happens and the 1% of NIH budget goes up by at least an order of magnitude, and similar for venture funding and philanthropic funding, and billionaires get convinced and all that, I think it's, high uncertainty, but I think it's pretty reasonable that we might get there 20 to 40 years after that sea change. So maybe if that comes within the next 10 years, that would be 30 to 50 years from now. But if that, it's important to note that we are making progress even at the pathetic funding levels we have. And so I think that, even if that sea change never comes, I could totally imagine it within 50 to 100 years.
And sorry, real quick, what level of sea change do you think? You think it needs to be like on
At
par
least
with
an
cancer?
order, at least an order of magnitude,
Okay.
at least 10xing, ideally more than cancer. Ideally, there's a huge total, flipping of the disease-centric siloed disease model, so that the majority of the funding goes to fundamental aging biology, since it's the underlying cause of all these age-related diseases.
So, but then you would need to be cryopreserved for a bit, right?
I'm 55, so if it sea change happens within a decade and we get the breakthroughs to come at the right level, I might only be 85. So, I'm on the border for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm more hopeful for my children. I mean, I think this is what I've been telling people for years. I think that, people of our parents' generation, I think it's pretty much too late, and our children's generation, I think they have a really good chance. And our generation, it really depends on how fast breakthroughs happen and the sea change in funding happens.
I don't think we differ that much there. Like, so bar, I mean, everything I'm saying is bar, we have ASI anytime soon, right? Or very, very powerful narrow AI, right? But if something kind of like research stays linearish to how much funding we have, and if we have that funding amount, I mean, 50 years maybe. But to be fair, my prediction saying 50 years is the same as my predictability of saying 100 years or 150 years, right? Yeah. Like the reason why I'm less confident, of course, is because cancer had these amounts of funding that you're hoping for, right? And now, I mean, whenever I give these talks to broader audiences, I make this case that saying, cancer has been telling us they're going to figure it out in the next 10 years, right? And now you say we're just about to make a big change in how fast we make research, right? The field of cancer has been saying that many, many times in the past.
I have two important things to say about cancer. I'm glad you brought it up. The first important thing is there are a lot of people within the aging and longevity field who argue that we must be very conservative with messaging due to all the snake oil perceptions and all of the overclaims that they think some people make in the field. And my counter argument to that is look at the cancer field. They made wildly over-optimistic claims and got huge amounts of funding that the longevity field can only dream about. And nobody pulled the funding when it was very clear that they had way overpromised in the beginning. Originally, when Nixon created the National Cancer Institute, everybody was saying it was going to be cured by 1976 for the bicentennial of the country. Wildly overoptimistic. The other thing about cancer is cancer's really hard. Cancer is one of the two areas in medicine, along with infectious disease like bacterial infections, where your enemy evolves very quickly and therefore can evolve its way around things. Consider something like senescent cells, which is a core aspect of aging. Killing senescent cells is so much easier than killing cancer. Once we figure it out, it's done. They don't evolve their way around it. So I actually think cancer is sort of it's inappropriate to express pessimism about the whole aging field because of how poor a record cancer has, because cancer is in some way one of the hardest. I mean, there's a book, The Emperor of All Maladies, explaining why it's so hard. I think aging, and there's a lot of aspects of aging that are going to be easier.
I mean, it's a subset though, right?
No, because the approach to aging and to rejuvenation is to fix all the pathological, molecular pathologies that are the underlying causes, the drivers of cancer and all the age-related diseases. But if that's senescent cells and misfolded proteins and non-degradable molecules that we just need one new enzyme for, each one of those are solutions that will be done when we do each one.
Maybe.
Okay, so let's turn this question around, and because the flip version of this question is, right, how long do you think it's going to be until we have end-to-end demonstration of cryostasis and revivification demonstrating good functionality afterward for a meaningful species, not a C. elegans?
would be a rat a meaningful species? Or
Well, so I mean,
human-
the first stage that I want to see is a mouse or a rat, a rodent,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But then, of course, we know that size is important, and those are probably too small to meaningfully be analogs of a person. So maybe a pig, or maybe at least a dog or a cat. And I don't know what the time frame for non-human primates is going to be.
decades. But not 2 decades. Many.
Okay.
I would also say 50 years plus, but somewhere in a range where I would say predictability goes anyway out of the window, right? Again, like I have no good feeling if I can predict 50 or 60 or 80 or 100 years.
How long do you think for a rodent or a dog or cat?
The problem is there's so much stuff in cryonics or in cryopreservation that it's like, we just have never tried it. Like so if the field maybe, there has never been the time when the field got 200 million, which any random biotech company in the aging field gets all day long, right? So maybe it's easier than we think, but if any of the nanotech repair is required to do it, right, then probably way more in the decades range, even that. So I think the difference is if advanced nanotech is required to do repair post-preservation, then it's probably in the middle, somewhere between 50 and 100 years. If it turns out that if you just cool very fucking fast and you get a good cryoprotective agent and you warm very fucking fast, then it might be in the lower decade range. Like if you don't need to do any extensive repair. But then again, the uncertainty, what will be possible soonish, and making any linearish predictions is so even more difficult in cryonics, I would say, than in aging.
Right. So cryonics reanimation is almost certainly more difficult of a scientific problem than longevity escape velocity, but it also has a much longer timeline for success. That's what we've kind of been getting into. So how do you, in each of your cases, balance or weigh the scientific difficulty versus timeline difficulty?
So my argument why I work for it, because it's the only advantage of, or the only big advantage of cryopreservation is that you have, for the second part, the difficult part, the revival part, you have an unlimited within reasonable, you have a significantly longer, kind of even potentially unlimited, assuming stability in the organization and so on. That's the advantage. Otherwise everything else is worse.
So I recognize what you're saying, and I agree. Modulo, the implicit assumption here is that the preservation step is preserving all that's important to preserve.
Threshold, yeah.
Right? Because so there's 3. The question explicitly asks to compare the timelines for longevity escape velocity versus the revivification. But what's the timeline to get to the point where the technology is sufficient, where we can do the preservation correctly? So there's a question of whether we're there yet or not, or whether that's going to require yet more advances. And the problem is that we have high uncertainty, as you said in the answer to the prior question. We have high uncertainty about that. And the problem is we won't know the answer until we complete the circle and actually revivify, which was the nature of why I was asking for when we will at least have milestones on the way to thinking that we can do the size that we want.
As long as what we discussed in the morning, as long as n-grams and the part that we care about are kind of how if there's no big unknowns, right, then on that part we have significantly more certainty that the parts that make you, the memory, the identity, the personality, that stuff is, as long as it is encoded directionally how we think it is, I think there we have significantly more certainty.
So I think there's a lot of room for differences of opinion here, right? We look at the earlier today, the presentation of the survey of the neural experts, and quite a large number of them thought that the important things might be encoded in things that aren't just the synapses. And there's clear debate even within the sort of world experts on that. And then just look at the previous talk. So we have to, I guess, go into the whole difference between, information theoretic death versus death of the biological organism. So, Emil, would you personally do cryo if you were absolutely sure that there's no chance that you're going to have any kind of revivification other than mind uploading, right? So there are
the alternative cremation?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You would do it. You would do it. You would mind
If
uploading.
the alternative is
there's
cremation, I'm not on the mind uploading side, right? I have a lot of philosophical problems
preferences for the body.
with it. Yes, but if the alternative is cremation,
Got it.
then my
so-
answer is very clear.
So, in philosophy, there's a lot of question about things like the Star Trek transporter, which, digitally makes a digital copy of you, destroys the original, and then transfers the binary information and then reanimates that rather than actually physically transporting the atoms. And the question is the you that shows up at the other end you or just some clone sibling of you? And people differ on their attitudes to that, but I think it's a big difference of opinion whether you get revivified as your body and all the same atoms, or if you get revivified in a mind uploaded state.
Yeah. If you have these discussions at Lighthaven, the center of the effective the rationalist community, right? Then it always seems like the mind uploading is a big like 90% are not down with mind uploading. Like
90% are what?
90% of the people who sign up for cryopreservation with us
Are not
would
okay
the
with
mind
that.
uploading is not
Right. So then let's talk about the
And by the way, one more last thing, right? You said there's a big disagreement of what's needed for engram and memory
Yeah.
preservation, right? If you would ask the aging field, right, what's the most important factor to make escape velocity work? I think the scale would be worse. There would be more disagreement of what is required, right? I felt like there was already a good amount of consensus that synapses are probably what is required and so on.
But let's go back to the issue of even if it is just synapses, let's go back to the issue of what's the likelihood that the biostasis preservation process is already to the point where it's good enough for some future technology, right? What's probably going to happen, right, is that we're going to improve the process, and then the amount of time it takes to get a revivification process to be good will be shorter for the people who are preserved later, and will be longer for the people who are preserved today, and even longer maybe for the people who were preserved 40 years ago at Alcor. But how good how likely is it good? The previous talk specifically expressed pessimism that it was good enough now, except for the mind uploading digital preservation.
Yes, I'm not someone who thinks that any type of... So I think if you can do mind uploading, you can, with sufficiently advanced technology, you can probably also repair the damage in situ, in the flesh.
So I mean, your own CT scans demonstrated that the body wasn't perfused very well. So
but
maybe
bodies are
the
easy
head
to
is
replace,
preserved,
right?
but you're going to need a whole full body replacement? Is that so? Now suddenly the cryo revivification depends on that kind of full body growth.
Tentatively, and to be fair, of course, a kidney is significantly easier to repair, right? Because I don't care about that specific part of the kidney, right? If there's one that has a lot of damage, you can. It's significantly easier. And tentatively, yes, it's possible that in the future organs need to be replaced, right? Currently, just our focus is very much on the brain, right? I hope that in 10 years these slides look much better. And we fundamentally agree. Like I just thought about it, right? You said you would go 90-10 for aging chronics. I'll take those 10. That's fine. So we can agree. Like I don't want more than 10 for now. 10% of all the money that goes into aging research for chronics. Happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, I would if I controlled the purse strings, I would definitely
give us 10.
I would definitely give you 5 to 10%. I don't put 5 to 10% of my own money, but that's primarily about just a difference in what skill set and knowledge is needed to make the judgments. But so I think we should keep going on this question for just a bit longer, even though we're going to, because I think another important question or issue I want to bring up, which goes directly to the issue of is the current biostasis preservation step good enough, is the issue of Emil, a lot of times when you give talks, you talk about the death being the alternative as if death is the worst thing. And to me, death is not the worst thing, right? There are things worse than death, and I actually want to make sure those don't happen, and death is a good backup to make sure those don't happen. So for example, significant brain damage to me is worse than death. And so I would be very like if you gave me a binary choice between guaranteed death and like 50% chance of 70% brain damage, I would choose death because I don't want 70% brain damage. That would be very, very,
you
very
might
bad.
choose that now, right? But there's a good amount of people who have significant brain damage who wouldn't choose that at that point. Like so possible, right? I think the majority of people that do have brain damage don't choose that. So maybe now you would say, I can't imagine how living would work in that time.
Yeah,
whatever, right?
Nice play. That's the same argument people use about aging. Well done.
Sure. I mean, to be fair, most people who are old, I just saw. I don't know if you had it in your slide, but Ariel showed me yesterday. It was in his book, right, where it said there's a lot of people in palliative care when they're old, even with high amounts of uncomfortability and pain levels, right, they still would like to live longer, right? I don't know, 70% or something like that. So it was quite relevant. So I think once you're in the moment, currently there would be a lot of people who would say, if I lose both my eyes and one arm, I wouldn't want to live. And then if that happens, which has happened to people, right, they don't want to die. So I think it's very much always that you can't imagine how it would be in the moment and you still enjoy life, right? So I would assume, yes, in theory, on a theoretical level, I agree with you. Like indefinite torture is probably worse. But in the real world, like meaning apart from like science fiction-y scenarios and dystopian evil world,
dystopian question earlier
right?
today. Yeah.
Apart from that, I think most scenarios, people in the moment would rather continue to exist than be cremated.
Maybe that's a quick moment for audience participation to see where the audience is at. Just raise your hand.
Cryo or cremation?
If you, no, if you think it would be worthwhile to be cryopreserved or to live on indefinitely, even if brain function is impaired. Okay.
And they don't even have brain damage. Yeah. Most of you probably, at least.
Right. Hopefully, of course, there's no brain damage, but in case there would it still be worthwhile?
The assumption is that there will be brain damage in a future when we have advanced medical capabilities. That's incredibly unlikely. What will happen is you will be fully functional, you will have a fully intact, completely healthy brain. You might suffer amnesia. So the debate is not...
Right. That was actually what I meant by brain damage. Like killing 70% of my current brain, even if that 70% is replaced, is not acceptable.
If you're talking about amnesia, then the debate you're having is how much amnesia are you willing to accept? That is a correct debate, yes.
Okay, great. But thank you for that.
Let's permanent amnesia, to be clear.
Move on for a moment here.
70% loss of self, I would say.
Yeah. So what if anything would make you switch sides and focus on the other topic? And I don't mean just obviously in this debate, but in general, any kind of slow progress on your side, or maybe you see big breakthroughs on the longevity side. What would make you switch?
Yeah. So if there's a clinical trial, right, where they take 80-year-olds, do some intervention, and then the remaining years of life left to the control group actually goes up, where you can actually increase maximum lifespan, would make me
consider. To the treatment group.
Say again?
To the treatment group.
Yeah. So control group versus treatment group, you do some intervention, and the treatment group gets additional years of life left. Old people intervention, where you bypass all these problems, like no one knows how to run clinical trials for 40 years, where you give someone to a 40-year-old and somehow. So, but that would at least make me consider. Like I feel like this is a good. Like when we actually show that we can increase maximum lifespan in humans by even a bit, it doesn't need to be 10 years, even by 2 years or a year would even say, hey, this is something.
I'd like to see, revivification with demonstration of function and memory in at least a rodent, but then ideally a rodent first and replication by a separate group, and then some larger mammal.
So there's no age point where you say, I'll start focusing on cryopreservation, no? Let's say you're 75, you still want to work.
The brain damage, the worse than death argument still gets me. But maybe when I'm completely pessimistic about the chances, maybe my mentality will change.
Right. As in you imagine a world in the future where you have significant loss of memory, but you wouldn't somehow be allowed then to do assisted suicide or whatever, something like that in the future. Because you could always opt out of it, probably apart from
yeah. The
dystopian worlds.
The problem is, I imagine that we're not going to know when we bring people back how much damage there is.
After you're being brought back, right? You feel like, yeah, that's
right. That's
why
the
you
thing.
lose
That's
me
the
a
thing.
bit.
I kind of
your
agree.
current self doesn't like your future self.
That's right. I kind of agree with your argument that once I'm there, I might want to live, but that doesn't mean I'm willing to go jump to that point. Like the fact that a brain damaged, the thing is, I don't want to be a different person than I am, right? So like, if somebody had a medicine, some weird treatment that they give you a pill and it totally changes who you are, the person you turn into is still going to want to live.
I like myself as well. That's fine.
But the person you turn into is still going to want to live, but that doesn't mean you want to take the pill and lose who you are and become this different other person. Some people might want that, yes, and you might want that for some other people, but but not necessarily for yourself.
Right. So that.
Right now, it's your current you versus the other you versus death. Then it's only two choices.
Right.
And just to clarify, would the emulated rodents
No, I don't. I'm not at all convinced that that emulation would be reliable enough to believe that it would be an accurate prediction of the real thing at this point.
Right, but that is an interesting kind of fundamental distinction. That the question is it worth it if some or a significant part of your memories are gone? Whether that still makes life worth living or not? I guess that's a difference that each of you will have to think about for yourselves. But I want to give, before we get to questions, a moment for kind of closing statements from each of you, any points that you haven't been able to make for your side, anything else you want to bring up, you have a few minutes.
I mean, we can just agree that Cryonics gets 10% of funding, or 5. Like then we're all good. Listen, but in the end, it's my argument, right? I'm not saying like, listen, let's stop all the aging research, let's stop all the cancer research, and let's stop everything else, and everything should go into Cryonics right now, right? Neither is this, I think, a moral or an ethical argument, nor is it a realistic argument, right? But as the world stands today, each of you, either you're an investor or you personally get involved in the space, right? You need to argue, like, am I going for that or this? Because unfortunately, yes, you cannot work. The day only has 24 hours. So ideally, yes, everything would be done with significantly more money and more people, but this is not the world we live in. So on balance, so partially I decided to go into this field because my marginal time and resources is just more effectful in Cryonics, because right now we have a 99.90.1 ratio probably between these two fields. And I'm more than happy to move it to 90-10.
So, two things that haven't come up that I want to touch on. One is that, there's a lot of legal issues right now, which I'd like to see worked out, right? Legally right now, a cryopreserved person is not legally a person, so they have no rights and they have no assets, and I think that's pretty bad. And I think that there's, that people think about the law as this fixed and clear thing, but obviously it's both, there's both gray areas and it changes, and so there's a lot of uncertainty about the future there, and so that uncertainty is another thing that makes me hesitant. And then another minor issue that didn't come up but that I think is important is that imagine, I'm curious what you think about this, Emil. Imagine we had perfect cryopreservation and everybody was 100% believed that it would work, guaranteed, for as long as they wanted. What percentage of the population today, if that were true and everybody believed it, do you think would actually choose to just become cryopreserved just so that they could choose to live their remaining years in the future rather than in the near future, in the far future rather than the near future?
I don't know, 10%? I don't know.
Yeah, that was kind of what I thought. Maybe 90% of people wouldn't do it and 10% would want to jump into the future. And so, I mean, why is that? I mean, I think that people like to live in the culture that they're in, and some future culture will be different. Plus, the loved ones, the colleagues, the friends, the family are here now, and you want to be with those people. So, part of culture is like, for example, every generation thinks the music from their generation is better than the generations that come after. For example, I was a teenager in the 1980s, so of course my generation is the right one. But that the consequence of this preference for the sort of short-term future rather than the longer-term future is a nudge in the direction of longevity and rejuvenation instead of cryopreservation. Minor.
If anti-aging treatment, longevity escape velocity stuff would work right now, I would take that. I don't want to be cryopreserved. Like the point is here, no one wants to be cryopreserved, right? Everybody would like your solution more, but just if you do as an expected value thing, and if you put the probability in, then I think it makes more sense to work on the other.
One last point, which is, I got into this field less because of trying to save myself, and more from the effective altruistic point of view of this is what's best for the world, how to save the most lives per dollar. There's a really good argument for cryo in that the people who are terminally ill now, it's their only solution because we're not going to fix aging in time for the people who are very, very old right now. But any resources that do go to cryo that are taken away from the aging longevity field rather than coming from somewhere else delay the bringing forth the full cure for the thing that kills over 100,000 people per day. And so there's an argument that the net number of deaths reduced in the long run, that's actually unfavorable. So you do save some of the people alive today, but at the cost of more overall deaths because you're delaying the overall cure for the problem. So now that depends on, assumptions about how much you think new resources to the cryo field will ramp up the number of people who sign up and become cryopreserved, and that depends on how fast the milestones and advances come in that field, versus how fast you think dollars will bring forward a total cure for aging. But that's my intuition.
I can turn this exact argument around, right? Like I have a preference for currently alive people, at least compared to future alive people, right? So every dollar that goes into trying to cure aging down the line gives people who are currently dying, which, as you said, is 100,000 per day, right? Or even a bit more than that, gives them a lower chance to be revived from cryostasis, right? So I think this works either way around.
Yeah, and would you agree with the statement that potentially cryonics research is the existence of cryonics could slow down how fast we reach?
On a theoretical level, it does. Just because there is money that goes into. If I talk to people, I tell them, "Hey, listen, it's not going to work aging. Give the money to me, to the cryonics, instead of aging." Right? I don't know how many people actually are convinced either way or the other, or just I don't know how much. Money is actually moving into either one or the direction where you can convince one. But in theory, yes, it does. I think it is one block of money, and there's just unfortunately not unlimited money that we can draw from. I think it is to a degree, even though it has been said multiple times, it's not an either or. Sometimes it is an either or. At least for me it is. I can only work on one of those two things.
Okay. All right, we're going to get into questions, but maybe start with a round of applause to thank our two debaters here.
Do you want to survive if you lost 70% of your memories is interesting to me because I think I'm a little different than many people. Because I know Mike Herring is not here. He's very keen on keeping all his memories, like 100%. To me, actually, I don't value my memories that highly. I think if my personality survives, if I lost pretty much all my decorative memories, I would still want to survive. I'd still be me. Especially if I had a lot of digital records, my writings, my photographs, lots of digital evidence, so I could go back and say, oh, I did that. That's who I was. So I'd actually, obviously I prefer to keep my memories, but if I had a fairly high chance of losing quite a large portion of them, I would still want to do this.
I agree with you. I was referring to all of what makes you you, not just declarative memory.
Yeah, one of the interesting points people are making is they're assuming that the reason you sign up is for yourself. One of the most effective arguments for signing up your relatives is to tell them that if they don't sign up, you will undergo great grief and you will be miserable possibly for thousands or millions of years. And I know this is an effective argument because I've heard of 2 cases where it was used quite effectively to sign up a relative who was otherwise resistant. Now, in this case, the person who signs up is not signing up to preserve themselves. They're signing up to prevent grief on the part of their friend who has, or their relative who's already signed up with Alcor. So the purpose of signing up might not be to protect or preserve yourself. It might be to prevent grief on the part of someone else. So the purpose of signing up is rather intriguing. But if your purpose is to prevent grief or to protect your relatives from the grief they will undergo if you die, is a very different motivation and produces a different set of reasons and motives for cryonics and cryopreservation. Just an interesting point.
You know, I think that point, under the assumption that the preservation process has high fidelity, that point makes a lot of sense. If you look at what causes, you know, the people in the aging and longevity field make the argument that not only does it cause the majority of death in the world, but it causes the majority of suffering in the world. And if you look at where that suffering comes from, it's minor things like osteoarthritis, which causes pain, you know, most of the pain of the elderly. But the real suffering from aging comes from neurodegenerative disease, and it's not that it's mostly not the direct, so in direct analogy to your question, it's mostly not the direct suffering that a neurodegenerative disease causes to the sufferer. It's the suffering caused to the loved ones who have to live with that sufferer and take care of them. So my point about worrying about non-fidelity preservation step causing revivification to a very damaged state, you know, is actually amplified by what you're saying in some sense, because I would be causing more suffering from my you know, if I came back in some bad state, but of course, you know, the other person's not going to be there anymore either. So.
The point of healthy. If you are healthy, you don't require a great deal of support. You're healthy. Your brain is healthy. You have amnesia. Amnesia is different from you are.
Well, so we don't yet know. I mean, ideally would have good medical technology to bring any damaged brain up to a normal level. But I don't think that we can be confident that by the time people start being revivified, that will
I think we can. I
be.
think we know what a normal brain looks like. We know what health looks like. And clearly we understand that if someone is in a state where they are not able to do anything for themselves, their brain is clearly functioning in a substandard way, that is an unhealthy state.
I mean, we can't currently, if somebody has a stroke that kills 70% of their brain, currently we can't bring them back to a full level of functioning state. So I mean, so what if we don't know whether or not the preservation step effectively is as bad as a 70% stroke? Then you know, we would have to make sure we wait till the technology is good enough for that.
Thanks for your thoughts on the debate. I was curious, what would it take, you know, I think Vitalist Bay, the mission statement here has always been to, you know, accelerate progress towards defeating biological aging. And, you know, given the timelines you guys have laid out, obviously they're pretty long. What would it take, do you think, in each field of biostasis and longevity to really get to that critical mass and point in time where we can see the speed of change much more rapid, so we can actually defeat or, you know, accomplish both goals simultaneously? And how do you think, you know, with AI tools that are getting smarter every day and are going to be smarter than us, maybe even OpenAI might have something behind doors that already is smarter than us, and if we have something has an IQ of 1,000, how can we use this to quickly accomplish these goals collaboratively and effectively?
So, I mean, the main thing that will speed up progress is more resources. And I think the main thing that unlocks more resources in both fields is demonstration of success and potential for future success, which comes from milestones that really show success. And so the talk I gave at the first weekend of Vitalist Bay was all about clinical success, starting FDA trials, getting approved for certain longevity pathologies, and the fact that more are coming because they're in phase 3 trials, so they've already succeeded to a somewhat. But there's a bunch of other, if we get pet longevity, if we get robust mouse rejuvenation, if we get, some things that show success, and then in the cryo field, I would think if we get end-to-end proof with mice as well as with nematodes. But, and people don't even know the nematode thing, like people in the field do, but I didn't know it till today. So, more publication of success will get more. So it doesn't matter how smart OpenAI is, it doesn't control the purse strings in government right now. So it's the public perception that matters.
I agree. Of course, it's resources, it's scientific breakthroughs. The biostasis field has the additional advantage of technically it could also just be, there was a time when no one wanted to be cremated, everybody wanted to be buried, then everybody now the majority gets cremated now. Technically a cultural shift towards cryopreservation, even without not having any additional scientific breakthroughs, just by people say, I want this, tail end or the probability, or I'm willing to sign up for the chance that it might work. If 5% of population signs up, the field is big enough to then have the resources. So there's this indirect path, which would be helpful. Yeah.
I would like to question the phrase "overall solution to the problem." So one could argue that perhaps we shouldn't fund ambulance services because they delay a solution to the overall problem of heart attacks. But even if you prevent all heart attacks, people still need ambulances for other things. Even a biologically immortal person, if you live long enough, calculations have been done on this, maybe 400 years on average, you're going to suffer a disease or injury that is not going to be immediately reparable, that you need to buy time for. And in some scenarios, so much time you might have to go below 0 degrees or into a solid state to do it. So I think we have to avoid millennial thinking that we cure aging and then we're in some kind of new world where cryonics is obsolete or biostasis is obsolete. I think it's an ongoing issue and need.
Right. So you're arguing even if we have full rejuvenation, we still need biostasis for the certain emergency needs. I agree completely. The 30-year-olds, 20 to 30-year-olds have roughly a 1 in 1,000 chance of dying in the next year. So you can compute how your 400, what number your 400 should be.
So this question is primarily for you, Karl. You've said that you'd be happier with it being somewhere like 90-10 and then the other direction.
I accepted the offer here.
Right. That's the offer. Right. So given that, as we've discussed, it's more like 99 or 99.9 to whatever. Would you say that until we reach that 90-10, anybody who we talk to, we should be encouraging any researcher who could go into longevity or cryonics to go into cryonics, any dollar that could go into longevity or cryonics to go into cryonics, etc.
No.
I think that was a big mistake.
No. I mean, as we covered earlier, there's everybody from both these fields who talks to anybody with money or anybody with purse strings. I'm wearing a shirt for the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives, A4LI, right? It's all about that, things that prevent age-related death should get more money relative to the overall NIH pie, relative to the overall venture funding. But we should be taking money from cancer and disease-specific areas, not from each other. Both fields should get more money, and it should come from things that treat only the end-stage pathology that's unique to a single disease.
All right. I think we need one more. Okay.
I have a bit of a concern about the world that we're waking up into. Can we set up an endowment for Nobel Prize winners, field medalists, et cetera, so we carry along humanity's current tests and drive us into the future?
Yeah.
You mean discount the cryopreservation for them? Seems like a good idea. Or just do it for politicians and maybe they'll be more on board. I don't know.
Okay. I think we should start transitioning to our next session. So
And in the end, I hope you're right. Like, I
I-
hope you win. You know?
And
Well,
you know, and I we got complimented for how quickly we were willing to do this debate, but you know, I do think that I would like to see more resources, and one way to get more resources is have more people sign up. So I hope my side of this debate doesn't cause too many fewer people to sign up.
No, we'll do it together for you later.
All right, thank you very much.
That was good.